Hello everyone, welcome back to Whisper Tales channel. Before we get started, comment below where you are from and what time you are watching. And did you know that 97% of you guys watching aren't subscribed yet? So make sure to subscribe and like. Alright, let's get into it. Story 1. The Hollowing of Meredith Van Laar. In the autumn of 2019, a woman named Meredith Van Laar purchased a small cabin on the outskirts of Gravenhurst, Ontario. She was 43 years old, recently divorced, and seeking what she called a reset from the chaos of her life in the city. The cabin had been on the market for 7 years. No one had made an offer until Meredith. The real estate agent, a man named Yannick Drouin, would later tell police that he felt obligated to mention certain things about the property. Strange occurrences. Previous owners who left abruptly. Complaints from neighbors about sounds coming from the empty building at night. But Meredith, according to Drouin, simply smiled and signed the papers. She wanted isolation. She wanted quiet. She wanted to be alone. For the first 3 weeks, everything was fine. Meredith documented her new life extensively on social media. Photographs of morning fog rolling across the lake. Videos of deer grazing at the edge of her property. Long, rambling posts about the peace she had finally found. Her friends commented with heart emojis and words of encouragement. Everyone was happy for her. Then, on October 14th, the posts stopped. Her sister, Britta Van Laar Okonkwo, tried calling. No answer. She sent emails. No response. After 5 days of silence, Britta contacted the Ontario Provincial Police and requested a wellness check. 2 officers, Constable Eilish McCready and Constable Pierre-Luc Tessier, were dispatched to the property. What they found has never been fully disclosed to the public. According to the incident report, which was later obtained through a Freedom of Information request, the cabin appeared undisturbed from the outside. The doors were locked. The windows were intact. Constable McCready broke a rear window to gain entry and immediately noticed what she described as an overwhelming smell, unlike anything I have encountered in 12 years of service. Meredith Van Laar was found in the basement. She was alive. The report states that she was seated in a wooden chair, facing the concrete wall. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She was completely naked, her clothing found in a pile near the stairs. When Constable Tessier approached her and asked if she was all right, Meredith did not turn around. She simply said, very quietly, "It's almost finished." When they finally moved her, they discovered that she had lost nearly 60 pounds since her last social media post, 3 weeks prior. Her eyes were open, but did not track movement. Her skin had taken on a grayish hue. Medical professionals would later determine that she had not eaten or consumed water in at least 10 days. By all known science, she should have been dead. But the most disturbing detail came from Constable McCready's personal notes, written after the incident. When we moved her from the chair, I looked at the wall she had been facing. There was nothing there, just concrete. But I could feel something looking back at me. I know how that sounds. I don't care. There was something in that wall, and it was aware of us. Meredith Van Laar was transported to a psychiatric facility in Barrie. She never spoke again. Not a single word. She would only write when given paper and pen. And she wrote the same thing over and over hundreds of times until the pen ran dry. It lives behind the thin place. It is patient. It is hungry. It is almost through. She died in 2021. The official cause was listed as cardiac arrest. But the attending nurse, Solange Beauchemin, filed a formal complaint with the hospital administration, claiming that something was wrong with the body. In her complaint, she wrote, "The body was cold before the monitors flatlined. I checked twice. She was cold at least 3 minutes before she officially died. The cabin in Gravenhurst burned down 2 months after Meredith's death. Investigators ruled it an electrical fire. The property remains unsold to this day. Real estate listings describe it as a unique opportunity for development. They do not mention what happened there. Some opportunities are better left untaken. Story 2. The Children of Pelham Road. There is a street in the town of Fonthill, Ontario, called Pelham Road. It runs for approximately 4 kilometers through what was once farmland, now subdivided into residential lots. The houses are modest. The lawns are well kept. It is, by all appearances, an unremarkable suburban street. Between 1987 and 1993, 7 children went missing from Pelham Road. Not from the general area, not from the surrounding neighborhoods, specifically from houses on Pelham Road itself. 7 children, ranging in age from 4 to 11, vanished without a trace over a period of 6 years. No bodies were ever found. No suspects were ever identified. The cases remain unsolved to this day. But that is not what makes this story disturbing. What makes this story disturbing is what happened to the Mikkelsen family in the summer of 1991. Henrik and Dagmar Mikkelsen immigrated to Canada from Denmark in 1985. They settled in Fonthill because it reminded them of the countryside where they had grown up. They purchased a house on Pelham Road in 1989 and had their first child, a boy named Christopher, in 1990. In July of 1991, when Christopher was 14 months old, Dagmar put him down for his afternoon nap and went to prepare dinner. Henrik was at work. The house was quiet. At approximately 3:45 p.m., Dagmar heard Christopher crying through the baby monitor. This was unusual. He typically slept for at least 2 hours. She went upstairs to check on him. The nursery door was open. Dagmar was certain she had closed it. Inside, Christopher was standing in his crib, gripping the rails, staring at the corner of the room. He was not just crying. He was screaming. A sound Dagmar would later describe as the kind of scream an animal makes when it knows it is going to die. Dagmar rushed to her son and picked him up. He clutched at her desperately, his tiny fingers digging into her shoulders. She turned to leave the room, and that is when she saw it. In the corner of the nursery, near the ceiling, there was a shadow. But it was wrong. It did not correspond to any object in the room. It moved slowly, like something thick and viscous flowing downward. Dagmar ran. She grabbed her car keys, strapped Christopher into his car seat, and drove directly to the Fonthill police station. She was hysterical. Officers had difficulty understanding her through her Danish accent and her terror. Eventually, 2 officers accompanied her back to the house to investigate. They found nothing. The nursery was empty. There was no shadow, no intruder, no sign that anything unusual had occurred. The officers were polite, but clearly skeptical. One of them suggested that Dagmar might be experiencing postpartum stress. She should rest. She should talk to her doctor. Henrik came home from work that evening to find Dagmar sitting in the car with Christopher. She refused to go back inside. She told him what she had seen, and to his credit, Henrik did not dismiss her. He had heard stories about Pelham Road. Everyone in town had. He suggested they stay at a hotel for the night. They could figure out what to do in the morning. They never returned to that house. The Mikkelsens moved to St. Catharines 2 weeks later. They sold the house at a significant loss. They did not care. Whatever had been in that nursery, whatever had been watching their son, they wanted nothing more to do with it. But here is the part of this story that no one talks about. In the years following their departure, 3 more families lived in that house. Each family had young children. Each family left within months of moving in. The reasons varied. Job relocations, financial difficulties, family emergencies. But interviews with former residents, conducted by a journalist named Ulrika Strand in 2008, revealed a consistent pattern. Every family reported the same phenomenon: a shadow in the corners of rooms where children slept. A shadow that moved when nothing else did. A shadow that seemed to be waiting. The last family to live in the house was a couple named Rowan and Cerise Duchamp. They had a daughter named Elise, who was 5 years old. In the winter of 2004, Elise told her parents that she had made a friend, an imaginary friend who lived in the walls. She called him the Tall, Hungry Man. Cerise Duchamp later told Ulrika Strand that she would hear her daughter talking to this imaginary friend at night. Long, one-sided conversations. Elise would ask questions, then pause, as if listening to answers only she could hear. The content of these conversations became increasingly disturbing. "Mommy, the tall, hungry man wants to know if I can come live with him." "Mommy, the tall, hungry man says there are other children where he lives. He says they're lonely." "Mommy, the tall, hungry man is getting impatient." On February 3rd, 2005, Cerise woke at 3 a.m. to find her daughter's bed empty. Elise was standing at her bedroom window, staring out into the snow-covered backyard. When Cerise touched her shoulder, Elise turned around and smiled. "He's here, Mommy. He's finally here." Cerise looked out the window. There was nothing there, just snow and darkness and the fence at the edge of the property. But there were footprints, large footprints, impossibly large, leading from the tree line to directly beneath Elise's window. And then, nothing. As if whatever had made them had simply risen. The Duchamp family moved out the next morning. They did not pack their belongings. They left everything behind. The house has been vacant ever since. Property records indicate that it is still owned by the Duchamp. They pay the taxes every year. They pay for minimal upkeep. But they have never returned, and they have refused to sell. When asked why, Rowan Duchamp would only say, "Some doors shouldn't be opened, and some doors, once opened, can't be closed." The 7 children who disappeared from Pelham Road were never found. But perhaps they were never truly gone. Perhaps they are still there, in whatever place the tall, hungry man calls home. Perhaps they are waiting for new friends to join them. Story 3. What came up from Sudbury Mine? Number 47. In the summer of 1978, a maintenance crew descended into Sudbury Mine number 47 to assess structural damage following a minor seismic event. The crew consisted of 4 men: Erkki Hautamäki, the crew chief; Diarmuid Cretan, a structural engineer; Josef Reinhauer, a geologist; and Benoit Carrière, a safety inspector. They were expected to complete their assessment in 8 hours and return to the surface by 6 p.m. At 11:47 p.m., 17 hours after their descent, Erkki Hautamäki emerged from the mine alone. He was immediately taken to the medical station, where he was treated for severe dehydration, numerous lacerations, and what the attending physician described as psychological disturbance of an extreme nature. Hautamäki was unable to speak for the first 3 hours. He simply shook, violently, uncontrollably, as if his body was trying to expel something terrible from within. When he finally did speak, his words were recorded by company officials and later submitted as evidence in the investigation that followed. "We found a cavity, not on any maps, never surveyed. We thought it was just a pocket, maybe some collapsed support structure. Diarmuid wanted to investigate. He was always curious, always wanting to know what was around the next corner. The cavity led to a chamber. Big, bigger than anything that should be down there. The walls weren't rock. They were smooth, like something had polished them over thousands of years, and the smell, like copper and something else, something alive." Josef found the markings first. He called us over, shining his light on the wall. There were carvings, Symbols we didn't recognize, not indigenous, not anything we'd ever seen. They covered every surface, floor, walls, ceiling, all the way up into the darkness. Benoit said we should leave. He said something was wrong with the air, said he could feel something watching us. I told him to calm down. I told him we were professionals. I told him there was nothing to be afraid of. I was wrong. At this point in his testimony, Hautomeki became agitated. He refused to continue unless all lights in the room were turned on. He demanded that someone stand by the door, keeping it open. Only then did he resume speaking. There was a sound. From deep in the chamber, from a place our lights couldn't reach, like stone grinding against stone, but rhythmic, almost like breathing. Diarmuid walked toward it. We told him to stop. We begged him, but he just kept walking, kept shining his light into the dark. And then he stopped. He just stopped, and he stood there for what felt like forever. When he turned around, his face was different. Not his expression, his actual face. The proportions were wrong. His eyes were too far apart. His mouth was too wide, and he was smiling. Smiling like he was greeting an old friend. He said, "It's awake now. It's been waiting so long. It wants to thank us." Then something reached out of the darkness and took him. Hautomeki could not describe what he saw. He would only say that it was too large, and that it moved in ways that were not possible. He, Joseph, and Benoit ran. They ran through tunnels they didn't recognize, deeper and deeper into the mine, trying to find their way back to the main shaft. Benoit Carrière fell behind. When they looked back for him, he was gone. There was no sound, no scream. He simply vanished, as if something had plucked him silently from existence. Josef Reinhauer made it to the elevator shaft with Hautomeki. But the elevator would only hold one person's weight. The cables had been damaged during their flight. Josef told Hautomeki to go. He said he would find another way up. "The last thing I saw," Hautomeki said, "was Josef standing at the edge of the shaft, his flashlight pointing down into the darkness below. And there was something there, something looking up at him. I could see its eyes, hundreds of eyes, reflecting his light like stars in a black sky. I didn't wait to see what happened. I couldn't." Sudbury Mine. Number 47 was sealed permanently 3 days after Hautomeki's emergence. The official reason given was structural instability rendering further operations unsafe. The families of Diarmuid Creedon, Josef Reinhauer, and Benoit Carrière were compensated generously and required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Erkki Hautomeki never worked in mining again. He moved to a small town in Nova Scotia and lived there until his death in 2012. Those who knew him said he never slept with the lights off. He never entered a basement or any enclosed underground space. And every night, before bed, he would walk the perimeter of his house, checking every shadow, every dark corner, as if expecting something to emerge. In 2015, a geological survey conducted by the University of Toronto detected a massive cavity beneath the sealed mine. The cavity extended downward for an estimated 3 kilometers and showed evidence of recent expansion. Something is still digging. Story 4. The recordings of Lake Nipissing. Lake Nipissing stretches across nearly 900 square kilometers of northeastern Ontario. Its waters are dark, stained brown by the tannins from surrounding forests. In the winter, the ice can grow thick enough to drive a car across. It is a popular destination for fishing, camping, and all the activities one associates with the Canadian wilderness. But the locals know to avoid certain parts of the lake after dark. They have known this for generations. In September of 2011, a documentary filmmaker named Helena Ostrowski arrived in North Bay with a small crew to investigate reports of unusual sounds emanating from the lake at night. She had spent 3 years documenting unexplained phenomena across Canada, and Lake Nipissing represented what she called the most consistent pattern of acoustic anomalies in the country. For 4 nights, Helena and her crew set up recording equipment at various points along the shore. They captured hours of ambient noise, wind, waves, bird calls, the distant hum of motorboats. Nothing unusual. On the 5th night, they received permission from a local landowner named Torsten Savolainen to record from his private dock, located in a relatively isolated bay on the northern shore. Torsten was reluctant to assist. He told Helena that his family had owned the property for 4 generations, and in all that time, they had followed one rule: never go near the water after midnight. When Helena asked why, Torsten simply shook his head. "My grandfather told me. His grandfather told him. We don't ask why. We just don't." Helena set up her equipment anyway. The recording from that night, later analyzed by audio engineers at McGill University, has never been fully explained. For the first 3 hours, nothing unusual occurred. The equipment captured the gentle lapping of waves against the dock, the occasional splash of fish, the distant call of a loon. At 12:47 a.m., the ambient noise abruptly stopped. For approximately 15 seconds, the recording is completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. As if all sound had been erased from existence. Then, the voice began. It was not speaking English or any identifiable language. The McGill analysis described it as structured vocalizations with consistent phonemic patterns, suggesting an organized linguistic system, but not corresponding to any known human language. The voice was deep, resonant, and seemed to come from beneath the surface of the lake. It spoke for 7 minutes and 32 seconds. Helena and her crew did not stay for the entire duration. Her assistant, a young man named Bhaskar Raghunathan, later testified that approximately 2 minutes after the voice began, they saw something in the water. "A shape," he said. "Massive. Darker than the water around it. It was moving toward the dock, and I could see a face. Not a human face. A face with too many features, like someone had pressed 3 or 4 faces together into one." They ran. They left their equipment behind. They drove directly to North Bay and checked into a motel with all the lights on. Helena retrieved her equipment the following morning. The camera had been destroyed, the housing cracked as if from immense pressure. But the audio recorder had survived, and the recording was intact. She released a portion of the recording online in 2012. It received moderate attention, with most commenters dismissing it as a hoax or misidentified natural phenomena. But then the messages started coming. People from all over northeastern Ontario began contacting Helena. They had heard the voice, too. Some had heard it decades ago. Others had heard it recently. All of them described the same experience: the sudden silence, the deep voice from the water, and the overwhelming sense of being watched by something ancient and hungry. One message, from an elderly woman named Serafina Thibodeau, stood out from the rest. She wrote, "I was 16 years old when I first heard the voice. That was in 1953. I was with my cousin Neville, and we had taken a rowboat out to watch the stars. When the voice came, Neville stood up in the boat. He just stood up and stared at the water, like he was listening to someone speaking directly to him. Then he stepped over the side and sank into the lake. I never saw him again. They searched for 3 weeks, never found the body. They never find the bodies." Helena's documentary was never completed. In 2013, she abruptly announced that she was retiring from filmmaking and moving to Switzerland. She refused all interviews. She deleted all her social media accounts. When asked about the Lake Nipissing recordings by a journalist in 2017, she replied with a single sentence: "Some things do not want to be documented." The recordings remain in an archive at McGill University. Researchers who have listened to them report a consistent phenomenon. For hours after hearing the voice, they cannot shake the feeling that something is calling to them. Something that knows their name. Story 5. The subdivision at Moonstone Hollow. In 2006, a development company called Prestige Properties began construction on a new subdivision in the town of Oro Medonte, approximately 100 kilometers north of Toronto. The subdivision was called Moonstone Hollow, and it was marketed as a luxury community for young families seeking an escape from the city. The first phase of construction went smoothly. 32 homes were completed by the end of 2007, and families began moving in by early 2008. The streets were named after gemstones: Emerald Crescent, Ruby Lane, Diamond Court. The houses were large, with 3-car garages and professionally landscaped yards. It was, by all appearances, a perfect place to raise children. The problems began in the spring of 2008. The first incident involved a family named Quilligan. Marcus and Fianuala Quilligan had moved to Moonstone Hollow with their 2 sons, Cormac and Oisin. In March of 2008, Fianuala reported to local police that her sons had been experiencing night terrors. This, in itself, was not unusual. Children often have difficulty adjusting to new environments. But the night terrors were specific. Both boys, ages 7 and 5, described the same thing. A woman standing at the foot of their beds. A woman with no eyes. A woman who would lean down close to their faces and whisper things they couldn't understand. The police dismissed it as childhood imagination. The Quilligans installed a nightlight in the boys' room and tried to move on. Over the following months, similar reports came from other families in the subdivision. Children describing the same eyeless woman. Parents finding their children standing at windows in the middle of the night, staring out at the empty streets. Pets refusing to enter certain rooms of certain houses. Then, in July of 2008, a 9-year-old girl named Anushka Dharamshi disappeared. She was last seen playing in her backyard at approximately 4 p.m. Her parents, Vikram and Priya Dharamshi, realized she was missing when she didn't come in for dinner. A search was organized. Police and volunteers combed the subdivision and surrounding areas for 3 days. Anushka was found on the 4th day in the basement of an unfinished house at the edge of the development. She was alive, but unresponsive. She sat in the corner of the empty basement, facing the wall, her lips moving as if in conversation with someone no one else could see. When she was finally brought out into the daylight, she began screaming. Not from fear, but from what her mother described as grief, like we had taken her away from someone she loved. Anushka never fully recovered. She was diagnosed with severe dissociative disorder and spent years in various treatment facilities. In the rare moments when she spoke coherently, she would talk about the woman in the dark. She would say that the woman had promised her things, beautiful things, things that could only be given underground. The Dharamshis moved away. So did the Quilligans. So did 7 other families that summer. But the most disturbing discovery came in September, when construction workers broke ground for the 2nd phase of development. Approximately 2 meters below the surface, they found bones. Hundreds of bones. Archaeological analysis determined that the bones dated back at least 300 years. They were primarily the remains of children, ranging in age from approximately 3 to 12 years old. The manner of their deaths could not be determined, but several bones showed evidence of unusual markings, shallow cuts in patterns that did not correspond to any known cultural practice. The land had not been a burial ground. There was no evidence of any indigenous or colonial settlement in the area. The bones had simply been placed there, carefully, deliberately, in concentric circles that radiated outward from a central point. At the center, archaeologists found a single object, a carved stone figurine, roughly 15 centimeters tall, depicting a woman with no eyes. Construction on Moonstone Hollow was halted indefinitely. The bones were removed and reburied in a local cemetery. The figurine was sent to a museum in Ottawa for analysis, but it disappeared from storage within a month. No one has ever been charged with its theft. Today, Moonstone Hollow is a ghost town. The 32 houses of the first phase still stand, empty and deteriorating. Occasional vandals break in, drawn by rumors of haunting. Most leave quickly. Some report seeing a woman in the windows, watching them. A woman with no eyes and a smile that is far too wide. The land was never developed further. Property records show that it is now owned by a numbered company with no public contact information. Some nights, according to those who live in the surrounding area, lights can be seen in the windows of the abandoned houses. Lights moving from room to room, as if someone is searching for something. Or someone. Perhaps the woman is still looking for children to bring underground. Perhaps she always will be. Story 6. The Final Voyage of the McKenzie Dawn. On November 19, 1984, a bulk carrier called the McKenzie Dawn departed from Thunder Bay carrying a cargo of grain bound for Sarnia. The ship was crewed by 18 men, captained by a veteran sailor named Aloysius Brennan. The weather forecast predicted moderate winds and manageable waves. It should have been a routine voyage. The McKenzie Dawn never arrived. On November 21st, the ship was reported overdue. A search was launched, spanning the length of Lake Superior from Thunder Bay to Sault Ste. Marie. Coast Guard vessels, aircraft, and civilian volunteers scoured the lake for any sign of the vessel or its crew. On November 24th, they found it. The McKenzie Dawn was discovered adrift approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Michipicoten Island. The ship was intact. The engines were running. The cargo was undisturbed. But every member of the crew had vanished. Not a single body was ever recovered. The investigation that followed revealed nothing. No signs of struggle, no evidence of fire or flooding. The lifeboats were still in their positions. The radio was functioning. The captain's log was found on his desk, open to the final entry, dated November 20th at 11:32 p.m. The entry read, "There is something in the water beside the ship. Deckhand Niall LaChapelle spotted it first. At first we thought it was debris, or perhaps a whale, though whales do not frequent these waters. Upon closer observation, we realized it was following us. It has been maintaining pace with the ship for 3 hours." A second entry, written in a shaking hand at 2:14 a.m. "It is not following us. It is circling. First Officer Guthrie reports seeing a face in the water, a human face. He says it smiled at him." A third entry, at 3:47 a.m. "The crew is panicking. Several men claim to hear singing. I hear nothing, but I can see something now, rising from the waves. Tall. Impossibly tall. Made of water and darkness and something else. Something old." The final entry, at 4:02 a.m., consisted of a single line. "It is coming aboard." No further details were recorded. The pen was found on the floor beside the captain's desk. The cabin door was open. The deck outside was wet, though no rain had fallen that night. The McKenzie Dawn was towed to port and decommissioned. The official report attributed the disappearance of the crew to unknown circumstances, presumed drowning. The families received death certificates and modest compensation from the shipping company. But the story did not end there. In 1991, 7 years after the disappearance, a fisherman named Quinlan Michaela was working his nets near Michipicoten Island when he pulled up something unusual. Tangled in the netting was a boot, a rubber boot of the type commonly worn by sailors. Inside the boot was a human foot, preserved by the cold water, with a name tag still attached to the sock. The name was Niall Lachapelle, the deckhand who had first spotted something in the water. Quinlan reported his discovery to the authorities, who conducted a brief investigation and concluded that the remains must have drifted from the original incident. They did not explain how a single boot had remained submerged for 7 years without decomposing. They did not explain why the foot appeared to have been bitten off at the ankle by something with very large teeth. Quinlan McKeela stopped fishing after that. He sold his boat and moved to Winnipeg. When asked about his experience, he would only say, "Something lives in that lake, something that doesn't let go of what it takes. But sometimes, just sometimes, it gives back a little piece, just to remind us it's still there." Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. Its average depth is approximately 150 meters, with some portions extending to nearly 400 meters. Scientists estimate that its waters hold approximately 10% of the world's surface fresh water. It is dark down there, dark and cold and largely unexplored. No one truly knows what lives in those depths. But the indigenous peoples of the region have known for thousands of years that something dwells beneath the waves. They call it Mishipeshu, the great lynx, the water panther. They say it is hungry and vengeful and utterly without mercy. The 18 men of the McKenzie Dawn may have learned this truth firsthand. We will never know for certain. Story 7. The Tenant of 47 Garland Street. The city of Hamilton, Ontario sits at the western end of Lake Ontario, nestled between the lake and the Niagara Escarpment. It is an old city by Canadian standards, with neighborhoods that date back to the early 19th century. The houses in these neighborhoods have seen generations of families come and go. They have witnessed births and deaths, celebrations and tragedies. They have witnessed things that were never recorded in any official history. 47 Garland Street was built in 1892 by a wealthy industrialist named Erasmus Holloway. It was a grand house, 3 stories tall, with ornate Victorian flourishes that proclaimed its owner's success. Erasmus lived there with his wife, Prudence, and their 4 children. By all accounts, they were a happy family. Until 1897. In March of that year, Erasmus Holloway was found dead in the basement of his home. The cause of death was determined to be heart failure, though the attending physician noted several unusual details in his report. Erasmus's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His fingernails were broken and bleeding, as if he had been clawing at something, or trying to escape from something. And there were marks on his body, particularly around his ankles, that resembled the impressions left by very small hands. Prudence Holloway sold the house within a month and moved with her children to Toronto. She never spoke of her husband's death. She never returned to Hamilton. Over the following century, 47 Garland Street changed hands numerous times. The property records show periods of occupancy interrupted by long stretches of vacancy. Several owners reported difficulties with the house: unexplained sounds, problems with the plumbing, a persistent chill in certain rooms that no amount of heating could dispel. But it was not until 2016 that the true nature of the house became apparent. In January of that year, a young couple named Oscar Lindqvist and Tamsin Kerrigan purchased the property. They were attracted by the historical charm and the affordable price. They planned to renovate the house and restore it to its former glory. Within a week of moving in, Tamsin began experiencing what she called visitations. They happened only at night, always between 2 and 4 a.m. Tamsin would wake to find a child standing at the foot of her bed. A little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, dressed in clothing from another era. The girl would stare at Tamsin in silence, her eyes reflecting no light, her expression utterly blank. Then she would point toward the basement door. Tamsin told Oscar about these visitations, but he never witnessed them himself. He suggested she might be experiencing hypnopompic hallucinations, a common phenomenon where dream imagery persists briefly after waking. Tamsin wanted to believe him. She tried to dismiss the visitations as products of an overactive imagination, but the girl kept appearing. Every night, always pointing toward the basement. In March of 2016, Tamsin finally decided to investigate the basement. She descended the stairs with a flashlight, her heart pounding, her breath visible in the cold air. The basement was unfinished, the walls bare stone, the floor hard-packed earth. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing that should have warranted such attention from a spectral child. And then Tamsin noticed the floor. In one corner, the earth was slightly disturbed, not dramatically, but enough to suggest that something had been buried there long ago. Tamsin began to dig, using an old gardening trowel she found in the corner. 6 inches down, she found the first bone. The police were called. Forensic archaeologists were brought in. Over the following week, they excavated the remains of 3 small children, buried in a cluster in the corner of the basement. The remains dated to the late 19th century. Cause of death could not be determined. But here is the detail that the police report did not include, the detail that Tamsin shared only with close friends and family. During the excavation, she saw the little girl again, not at night, but in broad daylight, standing at the top of the basement stairs. And this time, the girl was smiling. "Thank you," the girl said, in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "We've been waiting so long for someone to find us." And then she was gone. Research into the history of the house revealed that 3 of Erasmus Holloway's 4 children had died in childhood, reportedly of scarlet fever. But there were no burial records, no cemetery plots, no official documentation of what happened to their remains. Prudence Holloway had taken that secret to her grave. 47 Garland Street was demolished in 2017. The remains of the children were properly buried in a local cemetery. Oscar and Tamsin moved to British Columbia and have not returned to Ontario since. But neighbors report that sometimes, late at night, they see lights in the empty lot where the house once stood. 3 small lights, hovering just above the ground, moving in slow circles. Perhaps the children are still there. Perhaps they always will be. Some burials are not deep enough to keep the dead in the ground. Story 8. The Transformation of Wendell Arkwright. In the summer of 1997, a man named Wendell Arkwright inherited a farmhouse from his great-uncle in the township of Amaranth, in Dufferin County. Wendell was a city person, born and raised in Scarborough, with no particular affinity for rural life. But the inheritance included 40 acres of land, and Wendell saw an opportunity. He would transform the property into an organic farm. He would live off the land. He would finally escape the rat race that had consumed the first 35 years of his life. For the first 3 months, everything went according to plan. Wendell cleared fields, planted crops, and began renovating the old farmhouse. He found the work exhausting but satisfying. He found the solitude peaceful. He found, for the first time in his life, a sense of purpose. Then he found the well. It was located behind the barn, hidden beneath decades of overgrowth. The stones around its rim were ancient, worn smooth by time. The interior was dark, dropping away into depths that Wendell's flashlight could not penetrate. There was something wrong with the well. Wendell could feel it. A vibration in the air around it, as if the very atoms were unsettled. A smell, faint but persistent, like rotting flowers and something metallic. And a sound, barely audible, rising from the darkness below. A sound like breathing. He should have filled it in. He should have piled stones into it and covered it with concrete and forgotten it existed. That was what any sensible person would have done. Instead, Wendell became obsessed. He began spending hours at the edge of the well, staring into the darkness. He stopped working on the farm. He stopped eating regular meals. His sister, Moira Arkwright Brennan, visited in October and found him gaunt, disheveled, and speaking in sentence fragments that made little sense. "It talks to me," he told her. "It shows me things. Things that were, things that will be, things that should never be." "What talks to you?" Moira asked, terrified for her brother's sanity. Wendell just smiled. "The thing in the well. The thing that's always been there. The thing that's going to change everything." Moira tried to convince Wendell to leave, to seek psychiatric help, to abandon the property. He refused. He grew increasingly agitated, eventually demanding that she leave. She left, but not before calling the local police and requesting a welfare check. When officers arrived the following day, Wendell was gone. The farmhouse was empty, the crops untended, the barn silent. The only unusual thing they noticed was the well. Someone had removed all the stones from its rim and piled them in a perfect circle around the opening. And in the center of the well, floating on the dark water far below, was a piece of paper with writing on it. The officers retrieved the paper using a long pole. The writing was in Wendell's hand. It said, "I understand now. I understand everything. The well is not a well. It is a throat, and I am going to meet what lives in the stomach." Wendell Arkwright was never seen again. But the story does not end there. In 2003, a new owner purchased the Amaranth property and decided to fill in the well permanently. Workers were brought in to dump truckloads of gravel into the opening. It took 4 full loads before the gravel stopped disappearing into the depths. When they finally sealed the well with a concrete cap, one of the workers, a man named Gaëtan Trottier, reported something unusual. "Just before we covered it," he said, "I thought I heard something down there. Something moving. Something big. And I could swear I heard a voice. A man's voice, laughing, like he was happy. Like he had found exactly what he was looking for." The property has been vacant ever since. The buildings have collapsed into ruin. The fields have returned to wildness. But sometimes, according to local teenagers who use the property for parties, you can still hear something at night. A sound rising from beneath the concrete cap that covers what was once a well. A sound like breathing. Story 9. The Hiker of Algonquin. Algonquin Provincial Park covers more than 7,000 square kilometers of the Ontario wilderness. It is one of the oldest parks in Canada, established in 1893. Its forests and lakes attract hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. Most of them return home safely. Most. In September of 2009, a woman named Sarojini Iyer set out on a solo backpacking trip through the park's interior. She was an experienced hiker, having completed multi-day treks across 4 continents. She carried top-quality gear, a detailed map, and enough supplies for 2 weeks of wilderness travel. She registered her intended route with park officials and checked in via satellite messenger every evening. For the first 4 days, everything was normal. Her messages were brief and cheerful. Beautiful weather, saw a moose, living the dream. On the 5th day, her message was different. Something following me. Probably a bear. We'll be careful. On the 6th day. Not a bear. Don't know what it is. Can hear it at night, moving through the trees, too big to be a person. On the 7th day. It got close last night. I saw it between the trees. I don't have words for what I saw. Leaving early, heading back to the trailhead. Her messages stopped after that. Park rangers, alerted by the concerning content of her communications, launched a search. They found her campsite easily enough. The satellite beacon made it simple to track. But Sarojini was not there. Her tent was still set up. Her gear was still inside. But she was gone. What they found instead was a trail. It led from the campsite deeper into the woods, through areas that showed no evidence of human passage. Branches were broken at heights of 6 to 8 feet, as if something very tall had pushed through the foliage. The ground was disturbed in places, showing impressions that the rangers could not identify. The trail led for approximately 3 kilometers before ending at a cliff overlooking a small lake. There, on the rocks at the cliff's edge, they found Sarojini's hiking boots, placed neatly side by side. Her body was never recovered. The official report concluded that Sarojini had likely experienced a psychological break, possibly triggered by isolation or sleep deprivation, and had wandered off into the wilderness where she succumbed to the elements. The creature in her messages was dismissed as a product of paranoia. But the rangers who conducted the search knew that something did not add up. One of them, a veteran named Orla McLennan, later spoke about the experience in an interview with a true crime podcast. "I've been working in that park for 22 years. I know every animal that lives there. I know their tracks, their scat, their behaviors. What I saw in those woods, I don't know what made those impressions. I don't know what broke those branches. And I don't know what could have followed an experienced hiker for 3 days without being properly identified. But I know one thing. When we reached that cliff, when we found her boots, I felt something watching us. Something in the trees. Something that had been watching us the entire time. And I know that we were not supposed to find her. Whatever took her, it didn't want to be discovered. And when we got too close, it withdrew, like a spider retreating into its web. I put in for a transfer the following month. I work at a provincial park in southern Ontario now. Nice, safe, full of tourists. I'll never go back to Algonquin. Never. Sarojini Iyer's disappearance remains officially unsolved. Her family still holds out hope that she will be found, that she somehow survived, that she is living somewhere in the vast wilderness. But those who have spent time in Algonquin's interior know better. They know that the forest takes what it wants. And what the forest takes, it does not give back. There are things in those woods that do not appear on any wildlife registry. Things that have been there since before the park existed. Things that will be there long after humanity is gone. And every year, despite the warnings, people venture into the wilderness alone. Every year, some of them never return. Story 10. The Last Broadcast. On the night of February 14th, 2015, something interrupted the regular programming on CKWR 98.5, a community radio station in the Waterloo region. The interruption lasted for approximately 17 minutes. What aired during those 17 minutes has never been explained. The station's regular late-night host, a DJ named Jasper Kreutzmann, was in the middle of his Valentine's Day special when his microphone cut out. Listeners reported hearing a burst of static, followed by a sound they described as like metal scraping on metal, but rhythmic, almost musical. Then a voice began speaking. It was not Jasper's voice. It was not any voice the listeners recognized. It was deep, resonant, and seemed to come from very far away. It spoke in English, but slowly, as if unfamiliar with the language. This is not an emergency broadcast. This is not a test. This is a message for those who are still capable of listening. We have been watching you for longer than your species has had words for time. We have seen you crawl from the waters. We have seen you build your cities and wage your wars. We have seen everything you have ever done. We are not angry. We are not kind. We simply are. Soon we will stop watching. Soon we will make ourselves known. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when that day comes, you will understand what you have always been. You are not alone in this universe. You have never been alone. And you will learn, as all who came before you have learned, that solitude is not the curse you believe it to be. It is a mercy. The voice continued speaking for another 14 minutes, delivering what listeners described as a history of something that wasn't human. It spoke of civilizations that rose and fell before mammals walked the earth. It spoke of beings that existed between dimensions, feeding on fear and worship in equal measure. It spoke of a coming transformation that would remake the world. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the interruption ended. Jasper Kreutzmann's voice returned mid-sentence, as if nothing had happened. But Jasper himself had no memory of the previous 17 minutes. The station's recording equipment had captured nothing but static during that time. The logs showed no evidence of external interference. The only proof that anything unusual had occurred came from the listeners themselves. Hundreds of them, all telling the same story, all remembering the same words. In the weeks that followed, investigators from the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission attempted to determine the source of the interference. They found nothing. The broadcast had not originated from any identifiable transmitter. It had simply appeared, as if from nowhere, and then vanished the same way. Jasper Kreutzmann resigned from his position 3 months later. He refused all interviews. He moved to a rural community in Nova Scotia, and, according to those who know him, has not listened to a radio since. One listener, a woman named Ingrid Szczepański, recorded a portion of the broadcast on her phone. She attempted to upload it to the internet, but every upload failed. The file became corrupted. Her phone crashed and could not be recovered. She eventually gave up and tried to move on with her life. But sometimes, late at night, she still hears fragments of that voice, not from the radio, not from any external source, just in her head, reciting the words she heard that Valentine's night. You are not alone. You have never been alone, and you will learn that solitude is a mercy. What spoke through that radio station in 2015? What was it trying to communicate? And what did it mean when it said that soon it would stop watching? These questions have no answers. Perhaps they never will.